I've had many experiences with the paranormal, but nothing like this. This story took place a couple years ago, back when my wife and I were both in college. Like most college kids, we were very poor. My wife was in medical school, which put us in a lot of debt. I was still a full-time student, online. In order to save money, my wife and I decided to move in with a family friend down the road. My family friend and his wife were retired and were empty nesters. Their large house sat empty for most of the time, so they were more than willing to allow us to come stay with them. There was one thing that we did have to be mindful of. The family friend's wife had severe Alzheimer's. This really wasn't much of an issue. We would be off in our own room most of the time, but there would be times where we would need to watch the wife while the husband was out of town. The husband would be out of town about once a week. During that time, my wife and I would just check up on her every couple hours. It was pretty easy considering that the wife would never move. She would just stay seated in her chair all day. She would also never speak. There would be a few times where we'd hear mumbles, but it would be nothing coherent. Now that I have provided context, let me share with you my experiences. The first couple of days were odd. The house was large and was dimly lit for the most part. I think the light affected his wife's eyes. During those first couple of days, I kept seeing things in the corner of my eye. It looked as if someone was peering out of a doorway or sprinting down a hall. Once I fully noticed it, it would be gone. My wife didn't mention anything to me, so I just blamed it on the lighting, which made perfect sense. Like I said, the house was old and was heated by a furnace that was down inside the basement. When the vents would get heated, they would sometimes make weird sounds. It would almost sound like someone whispering behind you. After the first couple of days, these kind of things didn't bother me anymore. During the night, however, things began to get interesting. Our bedroom that we were staying in was on the second floor. The rest of the second floor was empty. While laying in bed at night, I would often hear someone walking around the upstairs. Of course, this could have been the owner, but when I'd go out and check, there'd be no one there. I would also hear doors open and close at very odd hours in the night. The bedroom that we stayed in didn't have a bathroom, so we'd have to walk down the hall to go to one. I would make sure to go before nighttime. I wouldn't want to have to walk down the hallway to the bathroom in the middle of the night. But unfortunately, there would be times where I'd have to do that. I remember one night, about a month in staying at this place, I had to go to the bathroom. While leaving the bathroom, I glanced down the hallway and saw what looked like a woman peering out from one of the doorways. I was definitely able to make out the long hair and the feminine features before she snapped her head back behind the doorway. I was beyond terrified. I then ran back to my room. Once in my room, I calmed down and thought over what I had just saw. I decided not to tell my wife. She would have been more terrified than me. I did decide, however, to bring it up with the family friend. He seemed pretty spooked, but also not surprised. He was hoping that whatever the thing was upstairs would have been gone by the time that we'd moved in. Obviously, it wasn't. The family friend then told me that one of the previous owners of the house had shot themselves in the room across the hallway, the very room that I saw the woman peering out of. He said that ever since they bought the house, they have noticed paranormal activity happening. He did reassure me, however, that no matter how bad the activity got, no one actually got hurt. I always made sure to keep the door across the hallway closed. This ended the sightings of the woman for a small time. Whenever I closed that room's door at night, I would always hear pounding coming from across the hall, coming from that very room. It got to the point to where my wife was waking me up, saying, "I think there's someone in that room." I would reassure her that it was simply the furnace redistributing the heat throughout the house and it getting trapped behind that door. I don't think she actually believed me, but it was enough to calm her down for the night. As time would go on, I would notice that the poundings would be louder each and every night. It got so loud that it just got to the point that we simply had to keep it open. Once we left the door open, the poundings immediately stopped, and thankfully, I never saw that woman peering from behind the door, but I did notice other paranormal activity in the house. This largely surrounded the homeowner's wife. When the husband was away, we would leave a baby monitor near her to see if she made any sounds or needed anything. This made it easy for me to do homework and to keep an eye on her. Like I said earlier, she had severe Alzheimer's. It was to the point to where she was not able to form a full sentence, but she was capable of saying a word or two. There would be random times throughout the day that I would hear random whisperings coming from the baby monitor. The whispering sounded nothing like the homeowner's wife, so I would go downstairs to check to make sure no one else was in the house, and sure enough, it was just the wife. This definitely gave me goosebumps a couple of times. One of the scariest things I heard on the baby monitor was the wife mumbling about something, and then someone responding in a full sentence, clear as day. I sprinted down the stairs to find the wife pointing in a corner with no one there. It was quite obvious that she saw someone I didn't. That essentially sums up the paranormal activity that I experienced in that house. To this day, I still think about the wife speaking to someone or something not of this world. A part of me is glad that I was not able to see who or what she was talking to. This story took place in the 80s when my uncle was just a child. Back then, he was a part of the Boy Scouts that was organized through my church. One of the church members was quite wealthy and had quite a bit of land. The land, for the most part, was a few hundred acres of flat land that had a few trees here and there. The big attraction of the land was the nice lake that was there. They would spend most of their time fishing and swimming in the lake. Next to the lake was a very large hill that overlooked it. On top of the hill was an old abandoned house that they were forbidden to enter. No one knew why they weren't allowed in. The scout leaders told them that the house was unsafe and could collapse at any moment. Despite the house being clearly abandoned, it looked in decent condition. Many of the scouts speculated that there was something there that the leaders didn't want them to see. Some of the theories on the house was that it was abandoned after a murder, or that the house was used for witchcraft, or was used for cult gatherings. Despite my uncle's severe curiosity, him and the other scouts stayed away from the house. That is, until one night. The night was like any other camping trip. Everyone was around the fire, enjoying s'mores and hot chocolate. The scout leaders began their famous ghost stories. At this point, my uncle and the other scouts had heard all of them, from all the past camping trips. It was getting late and the night was coming to a close. The scouts were not even remotely scared from the stories. Being somewhat frustrated by this, the scout leader decided to tell them the story about the house on the property. The scout leader then proceeded to tell the most scary ghost story possible, all of which was completely untrue, but it didn't matter. The scouts were all perked up in their chairs, their attention completely on the scout leader. The story the scout leader told went along the lines that some mentally ill patients from the nearby mental hospital escaped and sought refuge at the house. The house was being inhabited by a family at the time, who were then murdered and eaten by the mentally ill patients. Looking back at the story now, my uncle feels pretty foolish, but being young and being in the middle of the woods at night tends to make things more believable. The fabricated story had done its job. The scouts were completely terrified. But the scout leader wasn't quite finished. Instead of leaving the story at that, he decided to take it a step farther. He then asked the scouts, "Do you guys want to go hike up there now?" he asked. A majority of the scouts were excited at this. These were perfect conditions for a good ghost hunt. The majority of the scouts decided to join this impromptu ghost hunt in the middle of the night. They made this small hike up the hill in the middle of the night. The air was crisp, and the leaves crunched under their shoes. After about 15 or 20 minutes, they all reached the house, but all stopped just outside. The scout leader sheepishly walked up to the front door and tried the handle. The door slowly opened with an eerie creak. During this time, all the scouts were shining their lights inside the windows. Right before the scout leader entered the home, my uncle's flashlight shined on something solid inside the home. They only had a glimpse of it for a few seconds, but most of the scouts were able to see what it was. The thing inside the house looked like a small girl with pigtails. The girl was very pale, and her eyes were black. The light could not have been on her for more than 2 seconds before she dashed out of sight. Upon seeing this, everyone, including the scout leader, let out a scream, all running back towards the camp. The camp was in complete hysteria for the next hour. After telling the story a couple dozen times of what each scout saw, things finally calmed down. That was the last time that my uncle and his scout group went camping on that land. Too many of the Boy Scouts' parents complained, and they were never allowed to go back there. My uncle isn't exactly sure what he saw. It could have been a black-eyed child, or very well a ghost, but he does know that whatever it was, he was definitely glad that he didn't go inside. This story took place when I was in college. I was attending the college's Southern Idaho, which is located in Twin Falls. The town is somewhat small, but it does have a couple of nice places to go shopping. During that time, I landed a job at a retail store. I won't tell you which one, but I was selected to do night shift every now and then. The night shift at the retail store was pretty simple. I would just double check the inventory and make sure no one was hiding in any of the aisles, which has actually happened before. After doing those things, I was in charge of locking up. I would have to lock the front 2 doors and the one back door. I wasn't the only employee working at the time, so I wasn't alone. However, me and the other coworker didn't exactly get along. During the times that I would work night shift, I would see some strange things. For whatever reason, during the lockup time, I would always see things out of the corner of my eye. I just figured that just being in the empty store was causing me to see things. While working after close, I would always wear earbuds and listen to music as I worked. I remember a time that I lost my earbuds and I had to go a week without them. During that week without my earbuds, I would start to hear strange things at night. It kinda sounded like people talking down aisles. I'd go and check, and sure enough, there's nothing there. Whenever I was in the back office, I thought I'd hear my name be called sometimes. At first, I attributed this to the coworker that I worked with, but whenever I talked to her, she had no idea what I was talking about. It wasn't really like her to play jokes like that, so I just brushed it off. Things continued for about 6 months. That is, until we got a new security system. This one was high-tech for the time, and included digital cameras and motion sensors. The first week of motion sensors was a nightmare. The motion sensors would always go off through the night, and we always attributed it to user error. My manager would get a call in the middle of the night whenever the motion sensors would go off. This would happen about every other night, until we decided to get rid of that part of the system. The new security cameras, however, revealed a more scary story. During parts of the night inside our store, we're seeing images of a man with a hat walking down the aisles. This should obviously not be possible. All the doors would be locked, so we figured that the man was hiding in the store while we were locking up the store. This required to have one of the management to be present during lockup. Obviously, nothing really changed. We were already doing everything that we were supposed to. That is, until one night we decided to stay late to prep for the next day. The store was closed and everything was locked up. My manager and I were doing counts in the back, checking inventory. While in the back, we noticed on the security camera the man with a hat walking down the aisle. Since my manager was there, she was able to see what was going on in real time. Instead of being frightened like most people, my manager was quite angry. Instead of calling the police, she decided to go and confront the man, face to face. During all of this, I'm watching it go down live on the security camera. Right before my manager reaches the man with the hat, the man turns a corner and literally disappears. My manager angrily searches for the man throughout all the store, but obviously doesn't find him. My manager then calls me over the radio, asking me where the man went. I have no idea how to respond to this. "The man's gone," I said. My manager then storms back to the back of the store again, and reviews the security camera footage. The manager just figures that there must have been a blind spot in the camera, and that I lost him somehow. But upon reviewing it, she clearly sees the man disappear. During all of this, my other coworker is working up at the front cashier counting money. She clearly has no idea what is happening and is just going about her job. My manager then calls her over the radio, telling her that there's a man in the store and that she needs to come to the back office immediately. My coworker does that quickly, obviously being spooked by the prospect that there is someone else in the store with her. My manager calls the police and they arrive in about 15 minutes. We all search the store together and obviously we didn't find anyone. We even show the police the security camera footage, to which one of the officers responds, "Man, that's freaky." My coworker quit that night, and none of us blame her. Word had gotten around about the man in the hat around the store, which eventually caused the store to pick a new location. I worked the night shift a couple more times before we switched locations. Things weren't as intense as that one night, but they still were pretty spooky. I'm just very thankful that I no longer have to work the night shift, ever again.